Especially people that have quite recently started with wildlife or especially bird photography are looking for a telephoto lens and camera that first is not too expensive and second is rather compact and small but still delivers good image quality, a good low light performance and so on. And I've been using the Nikon Z50 II, an APS-C body, and the Nikkor 400mm f4.5 lens for a few days now, and I really enjoyed this combination because it's very lightweight, weighing around 1.9 kilos. And since we are having a crop body, this means that we have an effective focal length of 600mm, which is quite good for bird photography. And in this video I want to talk about several aspects such as the handling of this combination, image quality, autofocus, if the lack of the IBIS in this camera is a problem or not. And I hope this video will help you to decide whether this combination could be something for you or not. First of all, I want to mention that I realized that it's not the cheapest option or cheapest combination you can find. You can get a Nikon Z50 II easily below $1,000 US, but the lens is a bit more expensive. You can get it below $3,000 US, I believe, but it's still rather expensive. So the strength of this combination is maybe not that it's the most affordable, but that it's a lightweight combination that still gives you quite good image quality and background resolution. And I want to also talk about this. So first of all, as I just mentioned, 1.9 kilos ready to use. If you want to have it a bit lighter, you could even remove the tripod foot here. This would help to save some additional weight. But already like this, it's just a joy to use. And it's not only the weight per se, I think it's also that it's rather compact and you can quickly aim if you see a bird. Also for flight shots, quite easily to move. And I think for beginners, it helps a lot if you shoot handheld, to have a lens that is not too big and not too heavy, because otherwise it gets much more tricky to actually find the bird in the viewfinder, to kind of stay on the bird without shaking too much. And here this combination is very good. What I really enjoyed with this camera here is the autofocus. So unlike the more expensive Z6 Mark III, this camera actually has this specific bird eye detection autofocus mode that we know from the Z8, Z9, and it works really good. I've set it up in a way that I can switch easily between spot autofocus and the bird eye detection, and in general the camera is quite customizable, which I like. So I also put some buttons for focus preset and recall, or memory set and recall, and with this I was very happy with the autofocus performance. One question that I got from some people was, is it a problem that this camera does not have an IBIS, so an in-body image stabilizer? In my opinion, actually not so much if you shoot with telephoto lens. Of course, an IBIS can help here, but the IBIS is most effective with shorter focal length. And I did some tests with this one here. First of all, the moment you look through the viewfinder and start half pressing the shutter button and the image stabilizer kicks in, you can see it, how stable the viewfinder is. And then I also took some pictures at a local creek with a longer shutter speed, I think 1/30th of a second, that is 400mm, and don't forget about the crop factor. And the images were still sharp. Of course, not all of them, but I would say it was a majority. At least 50% were sharp, and for 1/30th of a second, I think that's quite a good measure, or shows how well the IS in the lens performs. So I would not worry too much about not having an IBIS in this lens if your prime goal is wildlife photography. Overall, I also like the image quality that I got from this 20 megapixel APS-C sensor. The images were sharp. I was quite happy with it. And of course, due to the APS-C body, I get up to 600mm equivalent focal length, which is already a lot even for smaller birds, and I can also combine it with the 1.4 tele extender. There are also some things that I didn't like so much, or at least for my style of shooting were a bit limiting sometimes. First of all, the camera has a frame rate of up to 11 frames per second, both in the electronic first curtain and in the mechanical shutter. I didn't use the electronic shutter so much for action because we have quite a visible rolling shutter effect. Again, this is expected at this price range. Keep in mind the camera is below $1,000 US. it's normal that we have some rolling shutter here. This is not a big deal. Then I switched for the shots where there was some action. I switched to the automatic shutter mode, which switches automatically between electronic first curtain and mechanical. And I prefer to keep it in this automatic mode and not set it to electronic first curtain, because actually if you limit it to electronic first curtain shutter, you can only shoot up to 1/2000th of a second. And obviously as soon as you have birds that are moving a bit faster, that's just too slow. With the mechanical shutter you can reach up to 1/4000th of a second. So I just kept the shutter mode on automatic on this camera. If I had some a bit shyer birds or just birds that were not moving so much, I actually used the electronic shutter, because there was no weird image wobble as long as the bird was not moving too fast, and I enjoyed the benefit of having a silent shutter. So 11 frames per second, regardless which shutter type you have, that's not a bad value. Like 10 years ago this would have been amazing for a camera of this price point. Nowadays it's still okay if you don't shoot too much action. For flight shots I found it a bit limiting, and it's just if you look at the competition, for example Canon, the R10 is much cheaper than this one, and it shoots 15 frames per second mechanical and up to 23 frames per second with the electronic shutter. So I would have wished for a tiny bit more, but still it's overall quite okay. What you can also notice is that you have not a typical blackout of the viewfinder, but more like a slideshow effect when you take pictures, regardless of the shutter mode. Again, also this, it's not a stacked sensor, so this is quite normal, and also a Canon R10 or R7 has this, or even a Canon R5 for that matter. Speaking of the viewfinder, I was not the biggest fan of it. It's okay, but it's rather small, and also the resolution is not so good, which was more or less okay for photography, but especially for checking if the images were properly sharp, I actually had a bit of trouble with the viewfinder, and I often realized that I was using the external monitor, or the flip out monitor, to verify if the images were actually sharp or not. Another thing that is a bit the limitation of such a small body, I suppose, is the battery. It's the EN-EL25 battery, these small batteries from Nikon, and it didn't last very long. I think today I was shooting for maybe 35 minutes or so before it was starting to blink red, and the last time I was out shooting it was a bit warmer than today, but still after like 40 minutes it also started to blink red. And the biggest problem that I actually had was that it changed all of a sudden from being almost full, so having lost only one bar, to blinking red. And this just means that I really highly recommend you to always have a spare battery in your pocket that is ready to use, and not just in the backpack that might be a few meters behind you. And second, I would buy at least 2 additional batteries if you go for this camera. I link them below if you want to buy them. Additionally, we don't have a joystick here to move the autofocus point around. This is something I really enjoyed on my Canon R10. I was surprised though that I didn't need to use it as much as I was afraid of in the beginning, because the eye autofocus is very good. Nevertheless, I would have preferred to have one here. One last thing, the image quality, as I mentioned before, if it's like more or less bright, like also today the snow is reflecting a lot, it's quite good. However, if you shoot a lot of action, or if you shoot after sunset, you can see that it's an APS-C camera, and at higher ISO you will have more noise. But I find this not too much of a problem nowadays with tools like DxO Pure or 4 that do a quite well job at keeping your noise levels down. You can see the comparison here, and I'm happy to announce that you can get 15% off. You can just follow the link in the video description, and at checkout enter the code Fabian15 and get 15% off. I mentioned this 1.5 crop factor before. However, if you think about it, if you take a high resolution full frame camera such as the Z8 with 45 megapixels and you crop this image down to the APS-C kind of view angle or something, then you also end up with an image that has around the same megapixels, around 20, and has the same image quality. But on the other hand, if you don't need to crop, you have the advantages if you have the full frame camera. So does this camera even make sense, or should you just get the Z8? So obviously, if weight and money is not an issue, then go for the Z8. It's the so much better camera. You have a better body, you have 2 memory cards, you have a bigger battery, you have a bigger viewfinder that is blackout free, the stacked sensor, 20 frames per second, the list goes on. However, I think it's not really a competition between a Z50 Mark II that costs below $1,000 and the Z8 that costs around 3 times as much. So I think especially if you are a beginner and you don't want to spend too much, this can be a very nice choice. And if you want to have a bit a cheaper lens, because this is the more expensive part, maybe if you also think that you will still need more focal length, then I would recommend to go for the Nikon 180 to 600mm lens. I've used that in the past with this camera. It works very well as well. Just for my style of photography, I prefer one with a bit of faster aperture, and this one is also more lightweight. So depends on your priorities. The 180 to 600 is certainly more flexible and it's cheaper, it offers more range. This one here is more lightweight, lets in more light. You can still combine it with a 1.4 teleextender if you want, but it's a bit more expensive. I hope the video was helpful for you, and if you want to buy some of the equipment, I put some affiliate links in the video description.